What's up, Creighton fans? Jon Nyatawa here, the Omaha World-Herald's beat writer for Creighton basketball, coming at you with another edition of the Creighton newsletter, video version. Uh, Obviously, the Jays had a monumental, let's say that, it's a milestone weekend in the NCAA tournament, winning twice and advancing to the Sweet 16 for the first time since 1974, the first time in the Sweet 16 since the field was expanded in 1985. So this was a hurdle that the Jays have been trying to clear for decades, and they finally broke through. So I wanted to recap a little bit about how they did that with two wins in the NCAA tournament, and then look ahead a little bit to the Sweet 16 matchup against Gonzaga here in this video. But before I do that, just wanted to remind you, if you have not subscribed yet to the written version of the Creighton basketball newsletter, this is a little video that pops up on top of the written story version of the newsletter. Get on that. All right, let's do it. Omaha.com/newsletters. It's a quick and easy way to you just click a little box, little check a little box, and you're in, and you start getting these weekly alerts. We try to get it to you on Tuesday. The schedule's a little bit disrupted right now because of the NCAA tournament and when Creighton's playing. So we'll get back on schedule here soon. But again, exclusive content on the Jays, stories, insight, anecdotes that maybe don't necessarily fit in the newspaper format, but I wanted to share it with you and give you as much info on the Jays as I could. So that's what the newsletter is, a new venture just for Jays fans, and I hope you check it out. Yeah, Creighton is in the Sweet 16. It's certainly a goal of these Jays for really since this group was formed, this group of guys 2-3 years ago. I feel like I can remember a specific practice actually, when these guys were youngsters. They played in a holiday tournament, beat Clemson, a ranked Clemson squad, and it was sort of a prove yourself moment for that young group, and they came back and had a practice that just didn't go well. Maybe they were kind of smelling the roses a little bit, just feeling maybe a little bit overconfident. And it didn't go well, and it ended with them running sprints. And I can remember them just huddling up on the practice court, center court, for 10 minutes or so, kind of talking it out with one another about, what do we want to achieve and where do we want to go and what is it going to take? And Sweet 16, that came up. That was mentioned as one of the goals. If we want to get there, we got to do some things. And the conversation was more about kind of sacrificing your role and being willing to just dive into the team first mentality. And so that was what was that 2018, when Mitch Ballock was a sophomore and Marcus Zagorowski was a freshman and Christian Bishop a freshman, Damian Jefferson sophomore, so like the core group of who Creighton is now, this nucleus that's led them to this pinnacle. Those guys were always sort of envisioning this moment, but it took them a while to get here. And obviously the pandemic played a role in that. Last year perhaps could have been the moment for Creighton to break through. Would have entered the tournament as a 2 or 3 seed and didn't get that opportunity because everything got canceled. Marcus Zagorowski was hurt, obviously, so that would have impacted it potentially. But they've worked really hard to get here, and obviously now they can at least briefly celebrate a moment. I wanted to sort of share some stories because I was fortunate enough to sit kind of courtside. I don't know if I'd call it courtside, but it's social distancing rules in place, obviously, with the NCAA tournament, limited fan attendance. It's a different atmosphere, a different environment. The team's in a bubble. Well, I guess not technically a bubble, but close to a bubble in Indianapolis. But they do let some media and some fans in to follow the action. And I was fortunate enough to be there for both games in the opening weekend. And I'll tell you, I thought the Jays looked really nervous in that first one against UCSB. Actually, maybe the overarching sort of takeaway there was that they looked inexperienced. which is weird because of all the games they've played together and all the action they've seen as a group, and just how many big time wins they've had. You think of they've been in some high profile moments as a team together, but nothing like the NCAA tournament. And I felt that showed. Like, again, I did think they were nervous early, and honestly, when you're watching it live, you're not quite sure if it's nerves or are they just not sharp. But to fall down 16-8 in the first 6 or 7 minutes against UCSB, to not really find a rhythm offensively until the end of the first half. Afterward, the players said, that was nerves. That was some jitters. But the other piece of inexperience that I thought I saw in that first game was just the inability to put UCSB away or maybe to maintain the advantage. Creighton went up 10, and I actually saw a couple of the players, if you remember back to that first game, Mitch Ballock drives in transition, gets an and one. The bench erupts. Creighton goes up 10. And I saw the players going down the floor. Like Marcus Zagorowski gets in his defensive stance and turns his head to look because he's at the top of the key. He turns his head to look at the rest of the team, and he's pointing to the ground. He's like, right now, this is our time. And Denzel Mahoney kind of piggybacks off that and claps and says, let's go. This is it. This is where we take the game over. 3 minutes later, next thing you know, their lead is gone. They were up 10, talking about, hey, this is where we got to seize control. And there was, I don't know, maybe an offensive rebound they didn't get, committed a foul on a three-point shooter, maybe just had rushed some shots offensively. But either way, like they knew they could recognize, hey, this is the moment where we got to kind of seize control of the game, but they weren't able to do it. And I do think, Marcus Zagorowski said afterward that like he was a little bit surprised to see the game swing like that from a momentum standpoint. But that's the NCAA tournament, man. UCSB has some athletes, has a lot of experience, has a lot of heart, and it's hard to sort of simulate that level of urgency and desperation that you're going to face from a team, an underdog team in that moment, even though you feel like you're on the verge of season control. So I thought those two aspects were really notable. And, I want to say Marcus Zagorowski said something about the Jays maybe just playing on their heels a little bit. I kind of felt like they were tiptoeing and not quite, they just didn't fully seem to stretch out and feel comfortable in that game, but they've survived it. Christian Bishop was a monster on both ends of the court. Defensively, what he can do in ball screens, and then offensively, just relentless on the glass and converting inside. And obviously, he stepped up and made those two big free throws. So they found a way to survive, and sometimes that's what it is in the NCAA tournament, especially in that opening game. If you can just find a way to get that win, then maybe you can gain some momentum and get comfortable in this setting and put together a long run. And I thought the second game against Ohio, Creighton just looked more like itself. One thing that's interesting is because Creighton, now when you watch the game, the Jays are pretty exuberant, enthusiastic, and that's when they play really well, is they're celebrating with one another. Marcus Zagorowski, like, pump fakes, one dribble, pull up, 3-pointer. He's doing the 3-point sign, the three fingers out, and skipping down the court while the other teammates are like, I think I saw Christian Bishop raising the roof at one point, just like they're demonstrative with their displays of enthusiasm during the game. But before the game, they're not that. They're so quiet, when they take the court for pregame warmups. Ohio's the opposite. They're getting ready for, maybe we're about 20 minutes before tip, and they're going through the layup lines, both teams. And the Bobcats are yelling at every sort of layup or dunk. The whole team is given that like boisterous yell every time one guy goes in. Meanwhile, Creighton, there's no one saying a word with the Jays. They're very stoic, business-like in their approach. And me watching that, I'm kind of like, does this mean, are they ready for the moment? Like, is this how they're going to approach it? But I think that's just who they are in terms of they're very detail oriented in their prep. You know, they try their best to make sure they cover every sort of aspect of the game, zone in, try to lock in during the lead up. But as soon as the ball is tipped, then they just sort of let it go and just try to assume that, hey, we put in the work to prepare us, and the instincts will just take over when the game begins. Like analytical to start as they prepare, and then once the game begins, it's freedom. You just act on instinct and instincts and lean on your preparation and everything that kind of led up to that. So I thought that was notable, man. Just like watching Ohio's guys just have a blast in pregame, and you know, they were yelling so loud you couldn't even hear the PA. The PA was playing on a video board in Hinkle Fieldhouse, playing the highlights from Ohio's upset of Virginia 2 days earlier, and you got some commentator kind of raising his voice or her voice on the screen, and you couldn't even hear that because the Ohio players are yelling so loud. Meanwhile, on the other end, Creighton's guys are just kind of going through the layup line, not saying a word. I remember Alex O'Connell he went in and dropped like a windmill dunk, like sick dunk, and the guys just kind of looked at him, and I think Christian Bishop gave him the head nod, like nice, but it wasn't time for them to break out in terms of the showing their emotions and fire and competitiveness. But once tip-off came, that was there. And so I think they're going to need that again. They're going to need that same sort of process going into Gonzaga. You're going to see a team that is really motivated to perform well. Obviously, they're happy to be here, but their goals weren't just limited to the Sweet 16. And so I think that they're going to play with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, certainly prepare with a chip on their shoulder as they consume the content this week, the predictions from folks, analysts, experts like me, I guess, and other media type fans from across the country in terms of supporters from other teams, followers of college basketball who most likely very few will give Creighton a real shot to win, to beat the undefeated number one overall seed Gonzaga. But I think that the Creighton players are okay with that. Like they'll use it as fuel, and they're okay kind of hiding in the background and preparing and getting ready and not bringing a lot of attention to themselves. But once the game begins, once the ball tips, they will try to perform at their best and have a lot of fun doing it. And so, and they'll play with sort of that bravado, that confidence that we've seen them show repeatedly over the last 2 years. So I'm eager to see what they can do and how well they can perform on this biggest stage. But it's been fun covering them thus far. And obviously we've had plenty of stories over the last 4 or 5 days just from the NCAA tournament itself. And we've got plenty more to tell, plenty more stories to tell, plenty more angles to hit. So if you haven't yet considered a subscription to the entire World-Herald, certainly do that because we've got a number of it's not just myself covering the Jays and this historic run. We've got other writers and other colleagues of mine working behind the scenes to put together some really good stuff. So consider that, support us. We really appreciate it. And then obviously, again, newsletter. So subscription, sign up, really easy. Omaha.com/newsletters. Get that, and you'll get some Creighton insight in your email inbox. I appreciate you watching. Thank you for the support, and we'll be back here very soon.